Hello, Mike, this is Chris Harrington, Jenny Palmer's brother-in-law. I'd like to know if Colin can answer. Unfortunately, I did not hear an answer, as apparently the call was suddenly interrupted by a loud scream from my wife, Mary, and an insistent knock on the locked door of my home office. After waiting a couple of minutes, I decided to redial Mike and Colin's home phone number. But before I could say anything, I received a threatening warning from Mike, who said that if I called again, he would report me to the authorities. I assured Mike that I understood everything. You have to understand two important things. I don't care if you decide to involve the authorities, and more importantly, I'll talk to your spouse, and there's not much you can do to stop it. Have a nice evening. This time, I enjoyed the call, despite the fact that the knocking on the door did not stop. I leaned back in my desk chair, closed my eyes, and considered the key decision at the end of a stormy day. Should I contact my brother-in-law? I thought about it. I first met my wife, Mary, when we were in high school. In junior high, I sat in the stands with my friends, looking forward to the start of a Friday night football game. There was a group of sophomore girls sitting across from us, chatting and laughing. As the game progressed, we took turns approaching the concession stand. When it was my turn, the charming blonde Mary joined me. We returned to our seats with hot dogs, French fries, and soda, and eventually sat down together. Mary was not only beautiful but also smart, funny, and lonely, a winning combination. In the middle of the third quarter, a voice asked if we were going to go to McDonald's after the game. The girls and boys from our group answered yes together, wanting to continue the fun at the nearest fast food restaurant. Taking a chance, I turned to Mary and suggested going to Tony's Pizza instead of the greasy fries. To my delight, she agreed. Our casual dates soon turned into a weekend tradition, and 2 months later, after getting to know each other better, we decided to move on to a permanent relationship. Everything went well when Mary agreed to be my prom date. When I went dancing with the most beautiful girl in school, it seemed to me that I was on cloud 9. But it wasn't for long. 2 weeks later, when I was running to tennis practice with my neighbor Julie, my world turned upside down. Julie, who was on the girls' team, took me by surprise with her unexpected confession. "I think you're a very nice guy," she said. I was taken aback, reminding her that we've known each other all our lives. "Why are you telling me this now?" On the run, she hit me on the shoulder and said, "It's great that you let Mary go to the prom with Jimmy Bain. Otherwise, he's so shy and boring that he would never have been able to go." Jimmy Bain was a nice guy, but definitely shy, nerdy, and I suspect on the spectrum. He was Mary's neighbor, and she always took care of him. I wasn't surprised that Mary agreed to go to the prom, but I was upset that she didn't have the decency to tell me about it. 6 other people complimented me on my maturity. They thought it was wonderful that my regular girlfriend was accompanied to the prom by her friend and neighbor. To tell the truth, I didn't feel mature. It infuriated me that Mary didn't have the courage to tell me about the prom. I knew she would confess during our regular date on Friday night. She had no choice. At the last moment on Friday afternoon, I texted her and canceled the meeting. I was bombarded with messages and voicemails asking me to call her. After a dozen calls to my phone, I finally plucked up the courage and texted Mary, saying that I had learned about her date with the graduate earlier in the week from several sources. It's a pity she didn't tell me about it. Trust is very important to me in a relationship, and at that moment, I felt that I couldn't trust her. I turned off my phone and sulked, not talking to Mary until the start of the next school year. On Friday afternoon, I was walking to my car in the student parking lot when I saw Mary sitting on the hood of my car. She asked if she could buy me ice cream at Dairy Queen, and this simple gesture marked the beginning of our reunion. We've been in a relationship for 2 years. In the second year, we maintained a long-distance relationship while I was in college in New York. Despite the distance, I often came home, and we shared a special moment on a Saturday night in March after her 18th birthday. Our relationship continued until Mary left for college the following year. 2 weeks after the start of her freshman year, I received a letter in which she informed me that our relationship was terminated. She explained that she wanted to enjoy college without becoming attached to a serious relationship. After that, I decided not to contact her. In my glory days, I was loved. I studied well and played tennis at the 3rd division level. After Maria, there were girls in my life all the time. It wasn't until 2 years after graduating from college that I met Mary again. At that time, I was working as a full-time engineer at a defense contractor and accidentally bumped into her in a bar while walking with work colleagues. We chatted for a few minutes, then returned to our groups of friends. For the next hour, I couldn't take my eyes off her, torn between thoughts of following her to the parking lot when her group dispersed. A smile appeared on my face when Mary's friends left, leaving her alone in the bar. She sat down on a stool and ordered a drink. Turning the chair to face me and looking at our table, I couldn't help but watch her turn away from the continuous stream of fans with amusement. It was only when she gave me a simple gesture that I finally broke away from my friends. I stood next to Mary and waited for her to politely refuse the other guy before approaching her. After she turned down 2 suitors, I finally made my move. Mary confirmed that she was waiting for me to ask her out because she was close to accepting another person's invitation. We dated for 6 months, after which we decided to become exclusive and move in together. 10 months later, we tied the knot and enjoyed a happy and satisfying life together for almost 5 years. My day started early because I had an appointment with a regular customer and his friend at 7:30 a.m. Our meeting was supposed to take place at the downtown Marriott Hotel in New Haven, Connecticut, famous for hosting the famous university. Upon arrival, I found Tony already waiting for me in the reserved conference room. While I was preparing my laptop, laying out the necessary documents, and pouring myself a mug of hot coffee, Tony and I struck up a casual conversation. Tony, a civilian contractor working on a new propulsion system for U.S. Navy submarines, was assigned to this project by his company. At the same time, I, a senior mechanical engineer, also participated in the development of the system. My company specializes in marine mechanics and acts as a defense contractor. Over the past few years, we have successfully cooperated on 3 major contracts. But during the current negotiations, Tony and I faced opposition from our superiors. We were informed that we must resolve the 7 remaining critical issues as soon as possible, otherwise, the negotiations will be transferred to other employees of our companies. Determined to find a solution, Tony and I worked hard, skipping lunch, and finally taking a break at 2:15 p.m. Do you think your company will accept it this time? Tony asked. I shrugged my shoulders and replied, to be honest, I can't understand why our last 2 offers were rejected. Tony thought about it. Over the years, you and I have become quite close. Maybe this is a test to see if we're too close. I grinned and confessed, I had the same thought. Exhaling, I stretched and shrugged again. Tony suggested, how about a drink? I took out a notebook and replied, I need to go through more than 30 pages of notes. I decided to stop drinking. Instead, I plan to stay and rewrite important resolutions into my laptop. I promise to send you a document of understanding by 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. If there are any misunderstandings, let's get in touch by phone right away. My report should be ready by noon tomorrow. Tony agreed, putting down his computer. I walked Tony through the lobby of the hotel, then bought a Diet Coke at the gift shop and returned to the conference room. When I entered the room again, it seemed to me that the walls had closed around me. Deciding to change the situation, I packed up and moved to a quiet corner of the hotel lobby. After contacting the office, I realized that there were a few small problems in the morning. After that, I texted my wife and asked her to have dinner without me. I settled into a comfortable armchair in the hall and got to work. The change of scenery was beneficial, and over the next couple of hours, I managed to do a lot of work. I was completely lost in my thoughts when suddenly a familiar laugh broke my concentration. Startled, I looked up and saw Jenny, my sister-in-law, strolling through the hotel lobby in a classic black dress and stylish high-heeled shoes. What attracted me the most was that she was walking arm in arm with a handsome man who was definitely not her husband, Scott. Without hesitation, I quickly took out my phone and discreetly took several pictures of this unexpected couple. At the reception, one of the photos caused me mixed feelings. I watched as a man's hand went down to her side and gently squeezed it. I managed to take another series of pictures as they walked to the elevator, capturing their last hug and kiss before the doors closed. When the elevator went up, I hurried to check which floor they got off on. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. Jenny, the daughter-in-law I respected, was with another man, not her husband. I was filled with anger and confusion as I sat down in my seat. I tried to make sense of the events of that day, from the tense negotiations to the unexpected betrayal. My thoughts were completely absorbed. I didn't even notice that the man took the seat next to me until he held out his hand to me. "Hi, I'm James, the general manager of Marriott," he greeted me when we shook hands. I introduced myself as Chris Harrington. "I've booked conference room L122 for today." James confirmed this information and then asked, "I noticed how you were photographing a couple who had just arrived. Are you familiar with them?" After a short pause, I replied, "I know this woman." "I suppose you were surprised to see her with a male companion?" James asked. I expressed my surprise to James, and he asked if he could be honest. After getting permission, James expressed concern about possible trouble if I stayed in this place. I assured him that I had never been in trouble before. Despite the possibility of confrontation, I promised that I would leave without disturbing the guests. James looked around the room, noting its calm atmosphere. Then he handed me a folded piece of paper. Unfolding the paper, I found the man's name and address printed on it. James asked, "Do you think there will be fewer conflicts now that you have this information?" I held out my hand and answered confidently, "I'm pretty sure." When I returned to work, I managed to do an amazing amount despite the fact that I was constantly looking at the elevator. After almost 3 hours, Jenny and her companion finally got out of the elevator. I quickly packed my bag and approached them. When they had only taken a few steps, I held my mobile phone to my face and took pictures as I approached the couple. Jenny was confused at first, but when I lowered the camera, her jaw dropped and she turned noticeably pale. "I would hug you as usual, but I'm disgusted," I joked. "Chris, what the hell are you doing here?" Jenny asked. "I came to a meeting. Why are you here?" I could see that Jenny was trying to calm down. She paused and said, "Chris, I want you to meet my colleague. We work together. We are here to inspect several conference rooms for an upcoming event that our agency is hosting." I looked at the man as he held out his hand to me. "Nice to meet you, Chris." "My name is Mike," he said. I ignored his outstretched hand, turned to him, and asked, "Mike, right? May I ask you something?" Mike and Jenny exchanged intense glances before I continued. "Do you think Jenny looks more attractive in those skinny, stylish jeans, tight blouse, and boots? Do you remember what a tight black dress she was wearing when you went to the 8th floor 3 hours ago to check the meeting rooms?" Before they could gather their thoughts, I looked at Mike's left hand and noticed the wedding ring. "This is a great engagement ring, Mike. It seems like you're just as much a lying and cheating scumbag as my dear sister-in-law," I said. Mike's face turned red, and he hissed, "Listen, you don't know what's going on. Stay out of this, or I'll kick your ass." I shook my head and replied, "I'm sorry to upset you, Mike. My sister-in-law's affair with a nobody like you definitely bothers me." I calmly crossed my arms behind my back and added, "As for kicking ass, don't be shy. Just keep in mind that I won't hold back defensively. As soon as you make a move, I will definitely teach you a lesson, send you to the hospital, and then inform the authorities." I stopped talking and grinned. Mike looked at Jenny and snapped. Without waiting for an answer, he rushed to the front door of the hotel. When Mike left, I couldn't help but warn him, "If I were you, I'd tell your wife." I paused and turned to look at Jenny, emphasizing, "Please sort this out, Jenny." After Mike left the hotel, Jenny turned to me, put her hand on my arm, and asked, "Chris, can we go to the bar and have a drink?" I was tempted to join her, but after a little thought, I quickly decided to give up. "I'm sorry, Jenny," I said. "I wasted a few hours waiting for you to finish your passionate party." Jenny flinched when I spoke. "I need to go home, have a drink, and think about how to tell Scott and Mike's wife." She squeezed my hand and pleaded, "I only do this when Scott is not at home. It doesn't mean anything." I looked into her eyes and asked, "How long have you known me, Jenny?" She was silent, but her gaze was intense. "It's been about 12 years since I first met Mary back in high school. Does that seem accurate to you?" After a tense pause, I angrily attacked Jenny, asking why she thought I wouldn't tell my friend about his wife's insidious actions. As I was heading out, I noticed James, the hotel manager, nodding gratefully at me. I walked through the revolving front door and started my way home, heading north on I-91, where there was no traffic during rush hour. I set the cruise control to 78 miles per hour and turned up the volume at the country music station. While I was driving, the only obstacle was the incessant beeping and ringing of my mobile phone, which meant that my wife was urgently trying to contact me. I drove into the garage, closed the door behind me, and got out of the car. Mary, my wife, was waiting for me in the doorway that connected the garage to the kitchen of the apartment. "Where have you been?" "What is it?" she asked as I walked past her and entered the kitchen. After laying out my work supplies on the countertop, I noticed Mary's cell phone lying on the kitchen table next to a half-empty glass of wine. Curious, I took the phone, entered the password on the keyboard, and opened access to her text messages. It was obvious that she had read the message I had sent a few hours ago, and I had paid attention to it. "You know where I've been," you read the message. "That's not what I meant, and you know it," I said, then went into the room to pour myself a bourbon. "Then tell me, what do you mean?" Back in the kitchen, Mary sat down at the table. She asked, "How did you upset Jenny?" "As far as I know, I haven't done anything to upset Jenny." "But Jenny, on the contrary, upset me a lot." I watched Mary gather her thoughts, sitting across from me. "Did you know that Jenny was cheating on Scott?" My direct question caught her off guard. "She said it was only once," Mary replied. "Well, that's a lie." I informed Mary that Jenny had told me that she had only cheated on Scott when he was on the road. After a short pause, I continued, "I see that you have bypassed my question. Do you know that your sister is unfaithful to Scott?" Mary took a sip of wine and replied, "Chris, this is Scott and Jenny's case." I nodded and said, "I agree, this is really Scott and Jenny's case, but it bothers me that Scott doesn't know about a serious problem that needs to be solved." Mary suddenly exploded, "Damn it, it's none of your business. I want you to keep your mouth shut." I came closer and leaned my elbows on the kitchen table, clasping my hands in a prayer gesture. I turned to Mary. "You know me well, Mary. You know me better than anyone else." Mary expected more and was amazed when I suddenly got up and rushed to the kitchen archway. After pausing for a moment, I finally turned back to her. "I asked you twice if you knew about Jenny's cheating, and both times you evaded the answer. I'll ask you again, how long have you known?" I mentioned that Jenny has always been a bit reckless. Predictably, Mary did not understand my obvious answer. She asked, "What does that even mean?" "It means that you don't want to answer a question that, in my opinion, is extremely important for our marriage," I said firmly. "What Jenny does when Scott is not at home has nothing to do with our marriage," Mary said firmly. "Let's think about it." I leaned against the arch and counted on my fingers. "First of all, my relationship with your sister will never be the same now that I know that she is a lying woman. At every holiday that we celebrate with your family, I will be reminded of your sister's betrayal. Secondly, you have shown me that you know about her malicious actions, and I can only wonder if you approve of them." "Chris, it's not fair," Mary said. "Also, although I don't travel as often as Scott, I go on one trip every month. Is it really the first time in a relationship that I have to think about whether you're cheating on me?" Mary's eyes widened, and she blushed, expressing her disbelief at being accused of cheating. I quickly intervened, explaining that I had never accused her of infidelity, but the way she reacted so calmly to her sister's misdeeds made me doubt her own actions. I paused and looked sternly at my wife before speaking. "We both know that you can't prove that you didn't cheat. All I have is my trust in you, and now that that trust has been severely shaken," I turned around and headed down the hall to my home office. After making sure that Michael Garnett was married and intercepting calls to his home phone, I reluctantly moved on to the last difficult task. I sent my brother-in-law Scott a text asking if he would come home on Friday. It took 10 minutes before he answered, "I will arrive at 2:30 p.m. Let's meet at the pit stop at 4 o'clock. Does this have something to do with Jenny's frantic call?" Scott asked. I was thinking about the answer when suddenly my phone rang. I picked up the phone and greeted Scott, turning in my chair so that Mary couldn't hear me through the closed door. "Chris, what's the matter?" Scott asked. It's as bad as it can be, I replied. Are you sure you want to talk about this on the phone? Scott hesitated before asking, is she cheating on me? I answered simply, yes. There was silence on the line, interrupted only by periodic sobs. I'll meet you in the pit, he finally said, after which he suddenly interrupted the conversation. I thought about contacting Scott, offering my support and listening to him, but in the end, I decided to leave him alone. I believed that he understood that I would be there for him when he needed me. While I was talking to Scott, Mary fell silent, probably trying to eavesdrop on our conversation. When I hung up, I heard her say through the closed door, please come out to the kitchen. We need to talk. Actually, I was going to go to the guest bedroom but decided to finish my bourbon while sitting at the kitchen table. Settling into the chair opposite Mary, I took a satisfied sip, enjoying the warmth spreading down my throat. I watched my wife, noting the frantic thoughts running through her head while she was preparing for the next attack. I felt exhausted. I had almost no strength left to resist, and I knew that more alcohol would not help. I was already anticipating Mary's upcoming attack when suddenly the phone in my pocket vibrated. In a rage, I pulled it out and looked at the screen, seeing an unfamiliar number, which only aggravated my already intense disappointment. Abruptly picking up the phone, the woman on the other end introduced herself as Colleen Charmat and apologized for calling so late. Someone from this number called me at home twice tonight. These calls upset my husband very much, and I suspect that the caller was trying to reach me, she said. Sighing, I told her, Colleen, my name is Chris Harrington. I called earlier and wanted to talk to you. In a somewhat gloomy tone, Colin said, let me guess, did you call to tell me that my husband is cheating on me with your wife? Get to the point. I told her, he's cheating with my daughter-in-law, her name is Jennifer Palmer, and I think they work together. She didn't answer right away. This is the third such call, and it will be the last, she said. How can a man do this to his wife and 4 children? It was obvious that her question was rhetorical, so I decided to intervene anyway. I have evidence that they were together at the New Haven Marriott Hotel downtown. Kissed in the elevator and returned to the lobby 3 hours later, I said. Jenny was wearing different clothes after they returned to the hall together. The conversation mostly consisted of exchanging email addresses and promising to send photos the next morning. When the conversation ended, Mary mentioned that Jenny had told her that he was in a free marriage, but that was not true. His wife and 4 children believed that they were in a monogamous relationship and lived a happy family. Mary looked surprised and covered her face with her hands. I added that this was not the first time she had caught him cheating and was going to divorce him. Mary stared at me in shock. I swirled the last portion of bourbon in my glass and tipped it into my mouth. After rinsing the glass in the sink, I headed to our bedroom. Lying in bed and thinking about everything that has happened to my extended family over the past few hours, I have come to the conclusion that I am not to blame for all this grief and destruction. As usual, my alarm went off at 5 o'clock in the morning. Instead of starting the day with exercises in our basement gym, I took a quick shower, got dressed, and went to work. I wasn't trying to run away from Mary. I had to go to the office to finish the memorandum of understanding and send it to Tony. Thursday turned out to be hectic. Tony and I spent 45 minutes on the phone to clarify some details, but I managed to send the finished agreement to my boss before noon. After lunch, I checked the email I received the day before and went home at 5 o'clock in the evening, at my usual time. I was wondering what was waiting for me in the evening, and I was only slightly surprised by what awaited me. As I turned onto our street, I noticed Jenny and her parents' car parked in front of my house. It's going to be a long, long night, I moaned, pressing the button to open the garage door. What the hell did you say to Scott? Jenny started when I closed the door behind me. Looking at my frightened wife, I said, I'm going to change my clothes. I'll be back in a few minutes, but I warn you that if your family disrespects me in my house, I will physically throw everyone out the front door. This also applies to you, Mary. Without waiting for an answer, I quickly headed down the hall to our bedroom. After standing there and thinking about escaping through the window like a coward, I finally made the decision to confront Mary and her family. It was hard for me to forget about the seductively opened bottle of bourbon, but I knew it was better to keep a clear mind. but my resolve quickly evaporated, and I found myself back in the bar, choosing a drink that would be enough to relieve tension but not too much so as not to disrupt the ability to conduct a polite conversation. I settled on a generous portion of my favorite amber liquid. When I reappeared in the kitchen, all eyes were on me. Everyone was sitting at the table. There was an empty seat between Mary and her father, Steve. Instead of sitting down, I leaned against the kitchen counter, watched the group, and moistened my lips with my drink. I liked my in-laws. They were good, respected people. Steve, my father-in-law, was a man I respected. He was direct, honest, and you always knew what he thought of you. If you stayed by his side, you couldn't find a better friend in the world. On the other hand, if you crossed his path, I was sure that he was capable of complicating everything. I was sure he could make your life miserable. Steve considered Scott and me friends. My mother-in-law, Betty, considered herself a cool businessman and an extraordinary businesswoman. She owned and operated a well-known local real estate franchise with an excellent reputation. Although Betty, my mother-in-law, oversaw the day-to-day run of the business, everyone involved knew that Steve was the brain behind her success. Maybe it's better to sit here. Mary patted the chair next to her. I've been sitting all day. I feel good where I am. Jenny seemed to be in better control of her emotions when she asked, "What did you say to Scott?" After a short pause to collect my thoughts, I told him that I had sent him an SMS with an urgent request for a meeting. After his return home, Scott called, concerned about the urgency of the situation, and I told him the news that you were cheating on him. His emotional reaction was obvious. He shed tears before agreeing to meet with me. I was shocked at how devastated the family was. Mary burst into tears and said, "I asked you to mind your own business." I asked if her statement was aimed at the benefit of her family. I replied that it was my business. My mother-in-law jumped up and said it was controversial before I could comment. Jenny asked, "Are you going to meet Scott tomorrow?" "I'm going to," I replied. "What are you going to tell him?" she asked. I replied that I had nothing more to say to him. I sent the photos I took and told him that you were with Mike for a little less than 3 hours. I sent him Mike's name and address. I think I'll be a support and a shoulder to cry on. "What about me, Chris?" Jenny asked. "Don't I deserve support too?" I smiled, looking around the table. "It looks like you have enough support, Jenny. I will stand by Scott on this issue." "How do you know that Scott doesn't cheat on Jenny while he's traveling?" "It's common for married men to cheat away from home," commented Betty, Jenny's mother. "I can't imagine Scott doing something like that," I replied to Betty, defending Scott. "To be honest, I have to admit that I have no idea how he behaves when he's not at home. Until yesterday, I never thought that Jenny was a cheater or that my wife could cheat on me." The table exploded. "How dare you, and this is unacceptable." Mary was visibly shocked by my statement, so I jumped up and continued. "At least I was honest and told Mary about it last night. Her cavalier and dismissive attitude towards Jenny's infidelity worries me. Steve, my wife's father, told me, Mary has never cheated on you. I can't believe you think so badly of her," Steve finished. I knew I had to be careful what I said next. I didn't want to turn Steve against me. I deliberately turned down the volume and sharpness of my voice, looked Steve in the eye, and challenged him. "Prove it." After a few moments of silence, I continued, "That's the point, Steve. You can't prove that Mary didn't cheat on me." Despite his protests, I insisted that I had trusted Mary completely for the past 6 years. I told her last night that my trust in her had been shaken. "That's not fair, Chris," I intervened before Mary could finish. "Last night, I asked you 3 times if you knew that Jenny cheated on Scott. You haven't answered my question. Instead, you changed the subject. You're not lying, but you're doing it dishonestly." Yes, I looked at Mary when she confessed. I knew about Jenny's affairs. I didn't support her, but I didn't want to make a big deal out of a molehill. For example, this one, she spread her hands, pointing out our current problems. I was so hoping that her business would go on as usual, and Scott wouldn't find out. I nodded. Although I was very upset that Mary was hiding her sister's infidelity, I could understand that she was protecting her sister. Do you remember our conversation about how we should be exclusive a few weeks before you proposed to me? Mary asked. When I nodded, she looked me straight in the eye and said, I promised that after our conversation, I would have neither romantic nor intimate relations. Moreover, I haven't been with another man since we started dating after college. Despite my innocence, I still saw the same angelic woman I married 5 years ago when she said those words, I love you and trust you. I assured my wife. There was a slight pause while her family considered my answer. It was clear that Steve was pleased with the result. When Betty asked, what are you going to do with Scott? My answer was simple. I will support my best friend, just as you all support Jenny. Scott deserves our support, and I intend to give it to him. Over the next 6 weeks, Scott had a hard time. He moved from his house to the apartment next door and began divorce proceedings with Jenny. Although he quickly applied for an official divorce, he was hesitant to start the divorce process. During this period, I regularly met Scott for dinner on Wednesdays, and Mary spent time with her sister. One Tuesday afternoon, when I was having lunch with colleagues at Clyde's barbecue bar, a man suddenly joined our table and said to me, Hey, I bet you forgot about me. It took a moment before I recognized the man standing in front of me. Hi, Mike, I said. I heard that Colleen dumped you. What does it feel like to be a negligent father? He grinned and replied, Go to hell, Chris, it's your fault. I looked at my friends Carl and Joe, who were expecting a funny exchange of opinions. Returning my attention to Mike, I replied, Yes, it looks like I'm to blame for your divorce. Mike chuckled and admitted, I think I played a part in it too, but there are so many married women around that I can't be faithful. I was already starting to feel uncomfortable when Mike continued, It seems that I have problems with inhibition, especially when it comes to such married women. I need to get them into my bed. Mike nudged Carl to his right. I did the same with Jenny, his sister-in-law, when her husband left town. I turned her into my personal toy and I shared and exchanged her with friends. It was incredibly popular, and we've been using it for over a year. She enjoyed every moment she spent with me and my friends. Just when I was thinking about ending things with her, I unexpectedly bumped into her and her attractive younger sister at a happy hour party. It was clear from the grin on his face that this acquaintance was not in vain. He reached into his back pocket, took out an envelope, and casually dropped it on the table next to my plate. Photos are usually stored in such an envelope. The grin on Mike's face conveyed everything I needed to know about the contents of the envelope. I must admit, my heart felt like it was torn into 1,000 pieces. There's no way I'm going to let this jerk see that I'm broken. I quickly grabbed the envelope and put it in my jacket pocket. Mike tried to make fun of me by asking if I was going to show our friends photos and videos of my wife and her sister with his friends. He boasted that he had been sleeping with my wife for several months and how wildly she was behaving in bed, laughing. He mentioned a video of her begging for intimacy, saying she likes being treated like an intimate object. He laughed again. What's the matter? Don't you have anything to say? I gritted my teeth, but I had to answer. I said, You're probably the dumbest in the world. He was still grinning from ear to ear when I told him that when I gave Jenny's husband Scott these photos, he would sue him. Since you are Jenny's direct supervisor, how long do you think it will take to sue you and your company? You will be out of work in a week. It was difficult, but I started laughing. This idiot realized that he had underestimated me and began to think about his next move. When I said, Do you know that I grew up in this city? What difference does it make to me where you grew up? This was big trouble, but I took my time. I know everyone moves and shakes in this city. Mike didn't look very impressed, so I continued. And I also know the nastiest pieces of it. I would like to advise you to leave the city while your legs are still working. Go to hell, I'm not afraid of you. I have witnesses that you are threatening me. He pointed at Carl and Joe. They both laughed, and Joe said, He really doesn't understand anything. Then I continued to paint a gloomy picture of Mike's future: divorce, loss of custody of children, loss of work, alimony, and child benefits, as well as potential danger. Mike, not at all embarrassed, confidently pushed back his chair, stood up, and answered, Go to hell, you freak. You're just a cuckold with a lousy wife. When Mike left, leaving me confused, I couldn't help but feel overwhelmed by the situation. Later, when I was sitting in my office and trying to make sense of it all, these words kept ringing in my head. I couldn't believe what I saw in the photos. It was just terrible for a happily married man like me. The picture showed Mary with 6 different men, some of them openly declaring themselves. In one photo, she was surrounded by 3 men and 1 woman. In another series of pictures, Jenny performed similar actions. The video was even more disturbing, and I felt crushed. Mary and Jenny were expected to be the center of attention during the exciting parties. The cries of "Take Me Harder" still haunt me. Pulling myself together and putting aside strong emotions of sadness, I texted Scott on the phone and asked to meet him for dinner. Feeling that I needed additional support, I also texted another friend to join us. Tears welled up in my eyes as I sat down at the table making plans for the evening. I didn't want to meet Mary, and I needed to avoid our meeting. I traveled a lot for work, and almost every month I had planned both regular trips and unexpected urgent ones. I sent Mary a message saying there was a problem with Whitaker's account, and that I was heading to the airport that evening. Scott and I had a quiet dinner together. We ordered a few beers, and I gave him the photos Mike had given me earlier. Scott was as upset as I was. We both agreed that divorce was the best solution for us and discussed the idea of suing the insurance agency where Jenny and Mike worked. In the end, we decided to heed the advice of our divorce lawyer. We had been sitting at the table for over an hour when Sal Mello came into the bar. He looked around the room, saw me, and came towards us. Along the way, he stopped to greet and chat with various people at other tables. Sal was older than Scott and me, and his daughter Trish was in school a grade below me. He owned a large car recycling warehouse on the outskirts of the city. I remembered a summer day 15 years ago when I was 16 years old and practiced my serve on the tennis courts near the high school. Trish waved at me as she rode her bike past the playground. A few minutes later, as I was picking up the balls scattered around the court, I looked up and saw 5 classmates forcibly pushing Trish under the bleachers of the baseball field, 100 yards away. I could guess what they were thinking, and I knew that Trish wasn't that kind of girl. I ran out of the court, and in a few seconds, I was already under the stands. Trish's t-shirt was torn. She screamed, cried, and tried to cover herself while the bullies were pulling at her shorts. Stan Malloy turned around just in time for the tip of my racket to hit his nose, causing it to burst. Blood sprayed in all directions, and Stan screamed in pain as he fell to the ground. My backhand hit Joey Burns on the cheek and knocked him out of his rut. The details of what happened next remain in my memory. The remaining 3 troublemakers grabbed me and beat me mercilessly while I was lying down. After delivering the last few blows, they fled the scene in a panic, while Trish continued to sob. I tried to regain my composure. We left her bike in the field, and she helped me get back into the car. Despite my shaking condition, I managed to get home before the car had completely stopped. Trish jumped out of the seat and hurried inside, still in tears. I had to get out of the car and walk around her to close the door, which she had left ajar. Just as I was closing the door, a loud crack caught my attention, and I turned to see a large man with a menacing expression approaching me. As he approached, he noticed the injuries on my face and the hunched posture. "Are you Harrington's child?" he growled. I could barely nod. I told him, "I think I need an ambulance, Mr. Mel." I leaned against the car and slowly and painfully sank to the ground. Mr. Mel knelt down next to me, took my chin in his hand, and turned my head so that our eyes met. "What the hell happened to my daughter?" Mel asked. "Some dragged her under the bleachers on the baseball field." "Was that you?" he demanded. I sighed and shook my head. "I've been practicing on the tennis court nearby." His every word felt like a blow. His eyes were blazing with anger as he asked, "What did those bastards do to her?" When I arrived, they had already taken off her shirt and were trying to take off her shorts. Despite the pain I was in, I knew that his piercing gaze would have scared me if I hadn't been so focused on helping her. "I need their names. Stan Malloy and Joey Burns will be waiting at the hospital when I arrive." I used my racket to hit them. When the ambulance and the police car arrived, I called the names of 3 more troublemakers. Mr. Mel came close to me, our noses were almost touching, and I could smell garlic on his breath. He said in a low voice, "If you ever need a favor, come to the village of Mel." When Saul joined us at the table, he sat down without any introductions. I handed him the envelope with the photos and waited for him to look through them. When he looked up at me, I said, "There's a man here named Michael Charmont. He works for Jimmy Sullivan's insurance agency. His hobby is to catch married women for his own pleasure and then share them with his friends. In the photos I showed you, he and his gang are with my wife and my brother-in-law's wife." Sal nodded understandingly, and I continued, "I hope he gets punished. His gait will become less athletic, and he will have problems with intimacy." The three of us sat in silence for a few minutes before Sal said a word. "Since you're both going to be single soon, it makes sense to join the gym. You can decide that you will go straight to the gym every evening after work. You can work out together for a few hours and then go somewhere and have a delicious dinner." He looked carefully at our confused faces, but before we could continue, he asked, "Do you two think you can come up with a reliable alibi for every evening?" After making sure we understood his point, he rolled his eyes, nodded at me, got up, and left the bar. Instead of heading home as I had originally planned, lying to Mary that I was out of town, I decided to stay the night at a nearby Marriott hotel. I was able to talk directly with the boss, giving him a brief outline of my problems. He agreed to let me work remotely and told me to send an email to his team informing them that I would be on a business trip within the next week. Feeling tired, I sank into an uncomfortable chair in the corner of the hotel room and plunged into its depths. I closed my eyes and thought about the last few weeks. It became clear to me that because of my tough stance towards her sister, Mary couldn't admit to her affair with Mike and friends. She was sure that I would divorce her, and she was right. And yet, as I pondered the idea of ending our marriage, I couldn't help but wonder if I would have been fair. If she had been honest with me from the beginning, instead Mary chose to continue lying to me. It was only when I discovered her betrayal in front of friends and colleagues that the truth finally became clear. I couldn't imagine a more disrespectful and humiliating situation than the one I found myself in, sitting across from my wife's lover and learning about her participation in group adventures. Her actions were incredibly unfair to me, so the chances of an honest divorce were slim. Instead of seeking an amicable separation, I vowed to take revenge on Mary. I was determined to destroy the woman who had once been my wife, my love, and my best friend. A peaceful divorce was not an option for Mary, and I struggled out of my chair. I went to the desk in the corner of the hotel room and began to develop my strategy. Until almost 1:30 a.m., I outlined my plans for how to behave with my cheating wife and our upcoming divorce. If my plan doesn't work, it will break her heart. But if everything turns out the way I expected, she will remain completely broken. The next day, I managed to arrange a meeting with a divorce lawyer. Despite the advice of a lawyer, I decided to postpone the division of our finances for now. I checked into a long-stay hotel and set up a remote office. I decided not to answer Mary's calls and texts until Friday. I informed her that I was going away for the weekend. Mary's reaction was extremely upset. She called and begged me to call her all weekend. Over the weekend, I managed to gather everything I needed for the project. Having finished with the checklist, I went on a long hike in the mountains. On Sunday, back at the hotel, I turned on my phone and found a lot of messages and missed calls from Mary. Along with her family and several colleagues, she frantically tried to reach me. She was upset that I was out of sight and was determined to find me. On Monday and Tuesday, I worked in my hotel room to complete all the business before leaving the office. The next day, I returned home. On Wednesday, after leaving the hotel and making sure that Mary's car was at work, I discreetly put the GPS device under her seat. It took several hours to install the necessary equipment and props at home, and by the beginning of the day, I had already finished. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I lit a fire in our living room fireplace. Mary and I often liked to sit by the fire on a winter weekend evening. We sipped wine, talked, cuddled up to each other, and looked at the flames in the fireplace. But today was not a cool February day, it was September. I waited until 3 o'clock in the afternoon and texted Mary that I had just arrived home. My phone rang, and I ignored Mary's call by sending it to voicemail. Instead of leaving a message, she texted me. I was watching the GPS indicator on my laptop, waiting for Mary to leave work, but she didn't leave right away. Determined to prove her case, she postponed her departure. While I was putting logs on the fire, the room was getting hotter and hotter. When the GPS showed that Mary started her journey home at 5:05 p.m., the temperature in the living room became unbearable, exceeding 100 degrees Fahrenheit. I resigned myself to the discomfort, my resolve strengthened. I waited for her arrival, adjusting myself to the right mood. There was a brief pause as Mary opened the garage door and entered the kitchen. I felt her presence while she was standing in the hallway, and then she finally came into the living room and found me sitting on the couch and looking at the fire. There were cheese and crackers on the table in front of us, as well as a bottle of wine. I raised my glass of wine, ready for what was about to happen. There was a second glass at the far end of the table, meant for Mary. "What are you doing?" she exclaimed, feeling unbearably hot. I turned away from the fire to look at her face and answered, "Don't you see? I have prepared a romantic reception for my wife." 2 beads of sweat ran down her forehead and cheek. She hesitated, and the word romantic froze in the air. Without finishing her sentence, she walked closer to the fire. Sinking to the ground, she picked up the charred object from the floor, examined it carefully, and then looked at the top shelf of the bookcase. Fearing that she might recoil, I watched as she turned to face me, and her eyes filled with horror as she showed the partially burned cover of the book. I expected her to be too shocked to speak, so I calmly explained that we had run out of wood and I used some old books to light the fire. I gestured to an empty space on the highest shelf where Mary kept a collection of books, most of which I had never touched. There were many others that we could use to light a bonfire. While we were talking, I got up from the couch, took a glass of wine from Mary, and handed it to her. I watched her face reflect different emotions, from confusion to anger. On her birthday, Mary's father gave her a favorite children's book written a year earlier. On the first blank page, he wrote a sincere message for Mary, sharing his aspirations and ideas about his daughter, presenting her with the same birthday present every year. She had 28 books at her disposal, each of which was a sign of her father's love, and she treasured these gifts very much. My jaw clenched when Mary let out a loud scream and made a sudden movement in my direction. It is not knowing whether she wanted to slap me or hit me, but the blow of her hand on my face was painful. Her nails dug into my cheek, and her hand collided with my left eye, causing a sharp pain. Wine from 2 glasses spilled on my clothes, soaking my shirt and trousers. Her expression changed again, and tears welled up in her eyes. I saw complete confusion again. Without saying a word, she turned and ran up the stairs to our bedroom on the 2nd floor. I heard the door close behind her. Although I was devastated because I knew my marriage was over, I was still smiling. My plan worked perfectly. When I looked in the bathroom mirror, I saw that my eye was red and began to swell. Mary's nails pierced the skin, and a trickle of blood ran down my cheek. "Let's get this over with," I told myself as I took my cell phone out of my pocket and dialed 911. "What's the matter with you?" I heard on the other end of the line. "My name is Chris Harrington, and I need police help with a domestic situation." "My wife was physically assaulted," I said. After telling the dispatcher my address, she asked, "Are you in a safe place, Mr. Harrington?" "Yes, I am." My wife locked herself in her bedroom. "I'll be waiting on the porch until the police arrive," I replied. The dispatcher asked, "Do you need medical help?" "No, I didn't get any serious injuries," I replied. The dispatcher remained on the line until the first police car arrived. I diligently answered her questions, knowing that my conversation was being recorded. Shortly after the first patrol car pulled up, a second one appeared. 3 policemen came towards me across the grass. "Thank you for coming, officers." "What happened?" an experienced veteran officer asked. I turned my head to show them the damage on the left side. "My wife, Mary, hit me," I explained. The officer asked, "Why did she hit you?" I wanted to be careful in my response. In the last few months, my wife had started verbally abusing me. I suspect that she is in a state of conflict. She's having an affair that she thinks I don't know about. In fact, I was planning to hand her the divorce papers tonight. "When we talk to your wife, Will we find any damage? He asked. One of the young officers asked, Are there any weapons in your house? I have some guns. All the weapons are stored in a safe in my office, and my wife doesn't know the combination, I replied. When two young officers came to my house to talk to Mary, I turned to the third officer and asked, Do you want to watch a video of my wife hitting me? He looked puzzled for a moment and then asked, Do you have evidence of the attack? I haven't looked at it yet, but I think I have proof, I replied. Asking him to follow me, I led him to the kitchen, where my laptop was on the table. I needed to wake up my computer and find a cloud storage account to show him the video. I opened the folder, rewound the video 30 minutes ago, and found the beginning of our confrontation. I pressed the play button and stepped aside so that the policeman could see what was happening. He watched until Mary left the room and ran upstairs, and then I asked him to look again. After the second viewing, he pressed the communicator button on his shoulder and said, Arrest Mrs. Harrington. Almost immediately, I heard Mary's screams coming from above, and my heart started pounding. I knew the officer had asked me a question, but I needed him to repeat it. Are all the rooms in your house under video surveillance? He asked. It was a series of questions that I didn't want to get into, but I knew I had to answer honestly. No, the living room is the only room with a camera, I said. He nodded his head understandingly, scratched his chin, and thought. How long have you had a camera in your living room? He asked. I shrugged my shoulders and admitted that it had appeared quite recently. Our duel of looks was interrupted when Mary screamed and begged, Chris, what the hell is going on? Please help me. I was about to answer when one of the young officers shouted, Sir, this is a police investigation. Please leave the room immediately, addressing an elderly man standing in the open front door of my house. With the same authority, the man said, I am the official bailiff, and I am here to transfer the case to Mrs. Mary Harrington. He walked over to Mary, and all three officers stepped forward in case the situation got out of hand. The man asked, Are you Mary Harrington? When Mary nodded, he held out an envelope and said, Mary Harrington, you have received a notification. In addition to the divorce application, there is a restraining order prohibiting you from approaching Mr. Christopher Harrington, his home, and work. Since Mary was handcuffed, he handed the envelope to the officer who was holding Mary's elbow. When the bailiff left, I turned to Mary. I saw the panic and confusion disappear from her face, replaced by calmness. She looked at me and asked, How did you know? Mike told me, I said. Two junior officers escorted Mary to the back seat of the patrol car. After receiving the third officer's business card, he asked me to send him a copy of the video. When I entered through the front door, I saw Mary being taken away in the first car. The senior officer stopped halfway to my entrance. He turned around and asked, I saw you at the pit stop sometimes, didn't I? Yes, I recognized you, Sergeant, I replied. He told me that he divorced his wife many years ago for cheating. I pay alimony, child support, health insurance, and a mortgage on the house she lives in with my kids and her goofy boyfriend. Maybe the next time I see you at a pit stop, you'll let me buy you a beer and tell me what the hell happened here today. Despite the chaos of this week, I found solace in going to work the next day, and on Thursday and Friday, I managed to be somewhat productive. But my relief quickly turned to disappointment when I returned home on Friday evening and saw my father-in-law sitting on the front step. When I pulled into the garage, I couldn't resist asking him, What brings you here, Steve? I poured 2 large glasses of Knob Creek bourbon, and we sat down at the kitchen table. We sipped our drinks slowly for many minutes before he asked, Is she cheating too? I just nodded. Is there any hope? He wanted to know. I took 2 more slow sips before I managed to calm down enough to be kind and respectful to Steve. I replied that this had happened more than once and to more than one man. I took another sip, and then I told Steve the whole truth. And it wasn't with just one man, I added. He looked at me in disbelief, and before he could answer, I told him, I saw photos and videos that made me feel sick. Steve slumped in his chair and turned white. A tear ran down his cheek. We sat together for a long time, each of us immersed in our own thoughts and memories. Mary and Jenny didn't learn this behavior from either their mother or me. His intense gaze was just icy cold. It took a few more minutes before Steve got to his feet and walked around the table. He hugged me tightly and sighed against my shoulder. Releasing me, he walked towards the door with the gait of a 90-year-old man. When he opened the door, he looked over his shoulder and said, "Burning those books was a shitty thing to do." I had completely forgotten about the trick I used to start an argument with Mary. I almost screamed when I said, "Wait a minute." I left the kitchen and returned a few seconds later with a small box. I handed it to Steve. When he opened it, he looked at me with a stunned expression on his face. "I know that you value these books, and I would never destroy them," I said to him. "How?" He was too shocked to finish his thought. I told him that I went to the bookstore and bought one copy that Saturday morning. As usual, I was sitting at the kitchen table and scanning our local newspaper on a tablet. I smiled when I read it. Asterisk Hartford Times, local section, West Hartford police are investigating a violent attack on a local man as he was leaving a nearby bar in the Elmwood neighborhood. Michael Charmon was attacked in the back parking lot of Tops around 10:30 a.m. His injuries are extensive and require hospitalization. A police spokesman said that the police have several leads and they expect an arrest soon. It was a bright and sunny November morning. I watched as a red Ford SUV parked a few spots away from me, and the driver slowly got out of the car. "Hi Mike, you look like..." I was standing in the parking lot in front of Jackson Physical Therapy and sat on the open back door of my pickup truck. The bird informed me that Mike had an appointment for 10:30 a.m. I continued, "It would be nice if you had a disabled badge so you could park closer to the building, you know, like other cripples." In addition to injuries to his knees and feet, Mike had a shattered jaw which will be fixed with wire for at least another month. "Does a cat have your tongue?" I asked with a grin. I have to give Mike his due. Despite his limp and leaning on a cane, he came up to me and stopped about 10 feet away. He knew that Scott and I had been questioned by the police and cleared of suspicion, but deep down, he knew that we were involved in his beating. And now, standing in front of him, he received confirmation. There was hatred in his eyes, and he probably imagined unspeakable acts of revenge that would last for months. I was sure that Mike and I would cross paths again in the future, so I took it upon myself to organize this meeting. I didn't want to spend the rest of my days looking over my shoulder, so I decided to meet him face to face. Mike slowly turned around and took the first step. "Mary Marie Charmont from Milford, Connecticut." When he turned around, I continued, "Susan Berg from White Plains, New York, and Lori Fitzpatrick from Brockton, Massachusetts." The hatred in his eyes was replaced by confusion. "If anything happens to me, if I get into a plane crash, drown during my vacation, fall down the stairs, I have arranged with my friends to visit your mother and sisters." I noticed a slight tremor in his hand. "My friends will beat their faces like yours. They will kick them in the legs like they beat you and Mike." I wanted to make sure he was listening carefully. I waited a few moments for him to digest the information before finishing. Mike looked at me for a few long moments and then nodded quickly. I couldn't tell if he was nodding in agreement or as a sign of a ceasefire. He turned and walked unsteadily towards the entrance of the building. Fortunately, that was the last time I ran into Mike Charette. I had already given my divorce lawyer the right to resolve all legal issues related to our separation. Since we had no children, our incomes were the same, and my main task was to distance myself from Mary. The process went smoothly. A few weeks after the breakup with Mary, my lawyer contacted me. She informed me that we had reached an agreement almost exactly on the terms we had discussed. And yet, Mary wouldn't sign the document until she got a chance to talk to me. I muttered some obscenity and was advised to just do it. Sit down and let her talk. Let's get this over with. Here's what I agreed to: let Mary sign the papers and you approve everything so that everything is official. I will meet with her within an hour in the conference room of your office. After she signs the papers, I heard that everything was going to work out, and the call ended. It took 3 days before I found myself in the conference room. June, the paralegal, knocked on the door, came in, and informed me that everything was signed and notarized. Nodding, she stepped back to make room for Mary. Despite the fact that she was clearly trying to get dressed and put on makeup, Mary's appearance did not matter to me at all. She was amazing even in a hoodie and a ponytail. Walking around the table, she leaned over and kissed me on the cheek, and then took the seat opposite me. "Are you as nervous as I am?" she asked. At first, I thought it was a strange way to start a conversation, but then I thought about her question. I shrugged and admitted, "I'm not nervous. I'm more worried. I want to end this and move on with my life." Tears ran down her cheek when she said she was being blackmailed. Mike was going to put a video of Jenny on the internet. Her father called me at the very beginning of the divorce process and said the same thing, so I wasn't surprised. Perhaps it all started with blackmail, but I watched the video. "I've seen you sleep with others 1,000 times, and they were real. You begged for a repeat. You begged every second." I was getting angry by the second and needed to calm down. After a few minutes, I continued, "You may have felt compelled, but that's no reason to ruin our marriage. If you find out that Jenny is cheating on her husband, it doesn't mean that you have to turn yourself into the same one." I was so disappointed and didn't see any other way out. What was I supposed to do? "You could and should have trusted me." I got angry when Mary rolled her eyes. I continued, "If we had gone to the police with Jenny, we would have had a chance to collect evidence. We'll never know for sure, but at least his wife and employer would have been informed of his actions, which would have given us some satisfaction. And most importantly, we would be united in opposing this together. Unfortunately, you have decided not to believe in me. I do not know if you were there at all." "PA, what kind of nonsense are you talking about?" Mary asked. I answered the question with a question. "Do you remember why we broke up the first time?" "The first time? You mean in school?" Mary looked completely confused. "What does this have to do with the case? In high school, you didn't trust me enough to tell me that you wanted to help your neighbor Jimmy and go to prom with him. You must be joking." I was a stupid schoolgirl, and I was afraid to hurt the feelings of my first serious boyfriend. "Were you stupid in college too?" I asked. When she gave me a questioning look, I continued, "On Labor Day weekend before you went to college, we made love on a raft on Lake Simpson, and then we promised that we would be faithful to each other and get married after college. Your promise lasted 10 days. Mary asked angrily, "Are you saying that you were absolutely faithful in your first year of college?" I shook my head and ignored her pointless question. "I mean, whether you agree or not, I doubt you've ever trusted me. Obviously, there is no trust between us, and there are good reasons for that. You're constantly lying or playing with words, so it's hard to believe everything you say." Mary tried to change the conversation by mentioning that she hadn't seen Mike since the problems started. When I reacted with a grin, she asked, "How is Mike feeling?" I told her that Michael had an accident that affected his ability to work at a familiar level. Embarrassed, Mary questioned my statement, which made me reply with a wide grin on my face. "He suffered numerous injuries, including to the intimate area, as a result of which one of them had to be surgically removed." Her voice was barely audible as she asked, "How do you know?" I replied, "I paid for this to happen." She covered her face with her hands, her eyes widened in fear as she looked at me across the table. "He's dangerous, Chris. I'm worried about you." I met Mike shortly after his accident, and we had a polite conversation. I think I managed to convince him that our relationship should end. Mary's expression changed from fear to affection, a look that has become familiar to me over the years. "You still love me?" she almost shouted. Stunned by her sudden outburst, I couldn't help but laugh. Clearly upset, Mary insisted, "You can't deny that you love me." I just shrugged and replied, "You're right. I can't say that I don't love you, but I also can't say that I love you. You have to understand that I don't want to waste time and effort cultivating the remnants of love in myself." Mary was on the verge of exploding. "Why are you even saying that?" It was a simple statement. I looked her straight in the eye and said, "You're not worth it." Mary visibly recoiled in her chair, tears streaming down her cheeks as she tried to catch her breath. With a heavy heart, I took out 3 photographs from the folder in front of me and put them in front of her in turn. In the first photo, Mary was depicted in a vulnerable state with another man. In the second, she was on all fours, an expression of anguish on her face. In the third, Mary was on her knees, a smile on her face. Looking at her, I realized that my future children and I deserve a better mother and wife than her. With a heavy heart, I said goodbye to Mary and left. A few days later, Mary was sentenced to 50 hours of community service in a domestic violence case. It took another 7 months to get a divorce. I sold the house and gave Mary her share of the proceeds, after which I moved to another city while keeping my job. Scott and I posted videos and photos of our ex-wives on the social network, which made the sisters blush when passers-by poked them with hoops. At the moment, I have no intention of dating and am focused solely on work. Scott is divorced and still lives in the same city. Steve calls me from time to time and asks how things are going, which I really appreciate. Scott and I meet sometimes when he comes to town on business. Although life has been difficult, I think it's even better this way. I was downstairs in the basement, trying to clean the drain hole in the air conditioner, when I heard the phone ring. Natalie was washing dishes in the kitchen, and I decided that she would answer the phone. I heard her pick up the phone through the air vent on the second floor. "Hi, Katie. It's good to hear from you. Haven't seen you for a long time." I didn't like Katie. She's been Natalie's friend since high school, and I've always felt out of place. Fortunately, we moved from Lancaster shortly after the wedding. It's a pity it wasn't that far away. Yes, that's exactly what I thought. 8 years have passed very quickly. What's going on? I didn't like the way this conversation was developing, but I only had one side. "Katie, wait a second. Steve works downstairs in the basement. Let me go and close the door. I'll be right back." I heard Natalie hang up the phone as she walked across the room to close the door. I crossed the basement and quickly picked up the wall-mounted extension phone. "Hi, Katie. I'm back. What did you want to talk to me about?" "Natalie, there's going to be a medical equipment conference at the Lancaster Holiday Inn next weekend, and guess who's participating? You won't believe it. Both of them. They will arrive on Friday evening and stay all weekend." "How do you know?" "Jared called me this morning and said he really wants to see you. He even asked me to convince you to join us in Lancaster for the weekend. It's just going to be you, me, Jared, and Martin." After listening to Katie's suggestion, I covered the phone with a rag. I really wanted to jump over the phone and grab Katie by the neck. What the hell is she offering? I do not know. "Katie, if I manage to escape, I'll be happy to come. I'm going to have to pet Steve a little bit. As soon as I find out, I'll call you back. Do you remember how we had a good time at the last convention when they were here, Natalie?" "You're damn right, I remember. This memory always comes to my mind when I cook breakfast for the children in the morning. I can't believe you had the courage to name your child Jared. How could you? Steve doesn't understand anything at all. He considers Jared his own, even though they don't have any similarities." This conversation was getting more and more awkward. Mentally analyzing the situation, I remembered that 8 years ago, Natalie and Katie were involved with these two men, and eventually, Natalie got pregnant by Jared. She said the baby was mine, and of course, she didn't tell me anything about the affair. Natalie and Katie planned to meet these guys again. "Katie, I'll call you as soon as I can. If I can't leave for the night, then at least for the day. It will be better than nothing. Okay, call me as soon as you find out." After we all hung up, I had a little time to think. We had 3 children. Jenny and Lynn went to school, and Jared came along about 8 years ago. Both girls are beautiful and smart. Both are studying hard, preparing for college. But Jared lacks motivation. He is not interested in studying or playing sports. Despite his flaws, I still love Jared. Natalie called out to me, asking if I was ready for coffee. I replied that I was almost done and would be up soon. I mentioned that I planned to take a shower before doing anything else. After taking a refreshing shower, I joined the family in front of the TV. I was puzzling over what to do next. It wasn't a small mistake on Natalie's part that she regretted. It was a deliberate act that she had committed and was going to repeat. I was torn between stopping it and leaving it as it is, or trying to fix the situation. If I decided to fix the situation, I needed to come up with a plan. I felt stupid because in the 20 years of our marriage, I had never thought about the possibility of Natalie cheating. "Steve, I talked to Kathy from Lancaster P today. She invited me to spend the weekend with her. Is there any problem with that? I will be very busy at work, but if my parents can look after the children, then everything should be fine, but with one condition. What's the condition? Natalie asked. Just don't forget to bring your mobile phone with you in case of any problems, okay? Thank you, my love. I will take my mobile phone with me, and I assure you there will be no problems. The Volvo station wagon is reliable and roomy for shopping. I plan to leave on Friday morning and return on Sunday evening. Is that okay with you? I will be glad. Have fun. Natalie went into the kitchen, and I heard her calling Katie to clarify their weekend plans. It seemed that she was not at all affected by the fact that she was cheating and that this could have consequences. I told her that I wanted to do some computer work before going to bed and that I would get up later. It was not difficult to find the website of the East Coast Medical Equipment Dealers Conference in Lancaster. It was all about the conference. All exhibitions were listed with a floor map. A schedule of lectures and seminars was presented, indicating the time and place of their holding. A list of participants with their hotel room numbers was also presented. Jared Kramer and Martin Blank shared a room at the 411th Hotel from Friday to Monday. Their home addresses and phone numbers in Baltimore were found. In addition, a company was discovered offering DNA tests by mail, including tests to confirm paternity and probable national origin. Most of the tests cost less than $100. Samples could be taken at home and mailed with a check or paid online. I filled out an application form on the website and paid for 4 paternity tests using PayPal. After printing out the sample collection instructions, I gathered everything I needed to get them. I printed the postage label and prepared a soft envelope for priority shipment. I have prepared several mailings with CDs and prepared a stack of empty discs. It is likely that the wives of Jared and Martin will want to get copies of the recordings from the evening event. Working for a consulting firm specializing in corporate security, I had a flexible work schedule and access to various information gathering equipment. When I had free time, I decided to take a week off. But during this time, I came to the conclusion that my marriage is beyond repair. My wife's betrayal 8 years ago, when she had an affair and forced me to raise her child, was already hard to forgive. But the way she and her friend Katie joked that they were cheating on me was the last straw. It became clear to me that there was no way I could survive this betrayal. Now she's doing it again. We'll have to end this forever. The next day, I took DNA samples from the children. They thought it was cool. Then I went to the bank and transferred almost all my savings into a trust fund for Jenny and Lynn, but left $12,000 in cash. I managed to arrange everything so that the trust was safe from my wife or an astute divorce lawyer. On Monday morning, I canceled all my credit cards and checking account and opened a new account in my name only. I was going to lock up the house so Natalie would have to find another place to sleep. I was sure that she would find some legitimate way to get into the house, but I hoped that by then I would have settled other issues with our son Jared. We could have worked it out later, even though he wasn't mine. I felt responsible for him. I looked into Seymour Lamp's office. Seymour has been my lawyer since I came to Reading. He was known for his fairness and diligence in his work, which I appreciated very much. I described my situation to him in detail, and he convinced me that reconciliation was not the way out. In addition to conducting the divorce proceedings, I asked him to contact Jared Kramer and discuss possible options regarding his son. I suggested that he pay monthly retroactive alimony in the amount of $15,000 or, conversely, take custody of the child and raise him on his own. The last option for Jared was to give up all rights so that I could facilitate his adoption. I was firmly convinced that he would agree to this. Seymour had everything he needed. I assured him that I would send him photos and audio recordings that he could use. He provided me with the email address of his office and pre-prepared mailing lists of physical materials. Betty Moore, the real estate agent, was the most annoying woman I've ever come across. Despite my general dislike of women, I admired her as a diligent and hardworking person. I provided her with a list of the details of our house and signed several power of attorney forms for her. I instructed her to personally get all the necessary signatures from Natalie. She grinned and assured me that it wouldn't be difficult. I mentioned that the locksmith would provide her with a new set of keys. I recommended using a wireless video camera cleverly disguised as a smoke detector for this purpose. I bought 2 of them, as well as 4 bugs, a tablet, a set of stickers with the company's logo, and 3 laptops. On the letterhead of the company, I made an order for the replacement of a faulty smoke detector in room 411. I packed the necessary computers and recording equipment in a standard suitcase, along with a small step ladder. I booked room 311 at the Holiday Inn under a pseudonym for Friday, as it had wireless internet access. I bought 2 disposable cell phones at Walmart at a bargain price to have a backup option. A couple of years ago, my parents moved to a rural farmhouse near Lebanon. The house was spacious for the 2 of them, but that was always my father's ambition. He planted a large vegetable garden, looked after the chickens, and maintained an orchard on the site. Jared loved going to the farm. My parents kindly received us, allowing us to stay here as long as necessary. Although my father called Jared Jake, he treated him with love. Though Jared's real name sounded like a sandwich seller's last name, and it was expected that Jared liked the name Jake more than his real name. A few years ago, my father bought a large motorhome and a small Kia for his travels. He used them only 3 times, after which he lost interest in them. I suggested that he prepare the motorhome for the trip. I understood that my daughters would be upset that they would leave their friends for the summer. They had 1 more year of high school left before college, and they wanted to finish it at a preparatory school in Vermont. Natalie was hesitant because of the tuition fees. Despite the age difference of 1 year, they studied in the same class. I had no idea how Jared would react to this. I'll deal with the school situation later. I had other problems now. At least all the kids enjoyed being with my mom and dad. Natalie left early the next morning. She was in tears and thanked me once again for letting her spend time with her friends. I told the children to pack up for the trip and take enough things with them for the whole summer. As I expected, the girls were delighted. I told them to get pamphlets from Burlington Prep School. Suddenly, the sky was filled with bright colors. They packed all their school clothes in case they needed them. To everyone's surprise, Jared was looking forward to the trip. Jenny came up to me quietly. "Do you need anything, Jenny?" I asked. "Have you packed everything, Dad?" "I'm 17 years old." "I'm not a child anymore," she replied. "Could you explain to me what's going on?" I didn't know what to say. "Do you have a problem with your mom?" Jenny asked. I hesitated, not wanting to discuss it with her. "If something were going on, Mom and I would try to protect you from it. Why don't you finish packing your things?" "No, Dad, I'm being sincere this time. It's completely different. Lynn and I are wondering what's going on. We think we deserve to be informed." I didn't want to talk to her about it, but I knew sooner or later it would come out. "Right now, I'm unhappy with the state of the relationship between your mother and me. Not everything is going smoothly. I can't pinpoint the problem, but I feel like something is wrong. Mom is unfaithful." I was silent for a while, doubtful. "I think so." Jenny turned around and went upstairs. "Lynn, you were right. What does it all mean?" "I think it would be better if Lynn explained." Lynn came down the stairs and approached Jenny and me. "Should I?" "Yes, he knows, but you still have to tell him," Lynn said. Before speaking, Lynn looked down at her feet. "About 4 months ago," she began, "I skipped school with a classmate from my lab. We came to my house to buy some CDs. It was Wednesday, when my mom usually goes shopping. I think you were at work in Boston at the time. As we were walking down the street, we saw a golden SUV pull up to the entrance. Floyd, your colleague, got out of it, and Mom escorted him inside. We waited outside for almost 2 hours until he finally came out. After waiting another 10 minutes, I finally decided to enter the house. When I came in, I saw that Mom was taking a shower, and the bed in your room was disheveled. I decided to leave and go back to school. Before the end of the day, when I got home, Mom had already cooked dinner, the bed was neatly made, and there was a stack of freshly laundered sheets in the dryer. I told Jenny what I saw, but she didn't believe me. There was a short silence, after which I said, "Thanks for telling me, Girls. This is something I never wanted to hear, but it's good that you told me. Jenny noticed the tears in my eyes and, without saying a word, took Lynn's hand and led her upstairs. Just at that time, my father drove up with a locksmith. While the locks were being changed, I quickly gathered up all of Natalie's clothes, shoes, and personal belongings and put them in large trash bags, filling the back seat of the car with them. After discussing this with the girls, I decided to work late before going to the conference. The rapid spread of the company caused a stir throughout the country. Despite the success of the marketing team in identifying new growth directions, the company had difficulty training enough employees, especially for senior positions. They tried to convince me to move to another office, offering many tempting options, but Natalie stubbornly refused to consider moving. Staying in the same position meant stagnation, and moving promised a promotion, an increase in salary, and additional powers. I went straight to the office of the president of the company. I asked if Mr. Turcotte could spare me a few minutes of his time. I was told that he would most likely be able to receive me. I've always gotten along well with Turcotte's secretary, and I had a feeling she felt the same way. Mr. Turcotte came out of his office and greeted me with a handshake. He expressed the hope that I had good news for him. I hesitated with the answer and asked his secretary, Helen, to bring coffee to the office and wait a bit with my calls. Steve, how can I help you? Mr. Turcotte asked. I have decided to consider my candidacy for one of the new senior positions in the company, where, in your opinion, I will be most effective. This is fantastic news. If you don't have a specific preference, I have a position in Anchorage that I would like to offer you. Do you like it? Surprisingly, Anchorage sounds like the perfect option. Will the first week of September suit you? I think so. I'll settle all the details on Monday. What is the second question you would like to discuss with us? I know it sounds weird, but I would like to send Floyd Cooper there to work for me. George leaned back in his chair and started laughing. You got it right. I don't know what you're talking about, George. I couldn't keep a straight face when I said that, Steve. No one wanted to tell you anything. I didn't like what was happening, but I didn't know what to do about it. If I fired Floyd, I was afraid you'd understand, and I didn't want that to happen. I decided it was better to try to keep it a secret. Unfortunately, Floyd Cooper has a long tongue. He started bragging about his affair with your wife. His secretary, Tracy, came to me and complained when Floyd started showing everyone the photos of him and your wife that he uploaded to his computer. The legal department is working on something right now, but I kept them on a short leash, trying to protect you. Now that you know, I can just fire Floyd. It's much more practical to just let him go here than to spend money on sending him to Alaska to terminate the contract. You're right. I was hoping to do more damage, but revenge is not the best management strategy. I will agree to any amount that you deem fair. George then contacted his assistant, Helen, to put him through to Tracy Tolliver. After informing Tracy about the situation, we went to Floyd's office, as he was currently working in Allentown. Tracy Tolliver was a very attractive woman. She was about 30 years old, but she looked great. The contrast of her brown hair and blue eyes never ceased to fascinate me. Slightly above average height, she radiated self-confidence like an Amazon warrior. I wondered how Floyd had managed to get the position of lead secretary in the building. I later found out that she had asked to be transferred to my office 3 times, but my current secretary refused to budge. You're going to need these discs, she said, handing me 4 blank discs. Please check the pending accounts and select Stoddard. Make copies for yourself, your lawyer, our legal department, and Floyd's wife. I have already prepared an information letter, but I need the name of your lawyer. I was impressed by her quick response. She was competent and efficient. Seymour Stamp's office can be found on Franklin Street. George and I entered Floyd's office as soon as Tracy gave the last address. There were 20 photos of Floyd and Natalie performing various intimate acts. The pictures were of poor quality. It looks like they were taken from a webcam. Most likely, Floyd also had a full-length video. The photos were not taken in her bedroom. George tried to be polite, but he couldn't help but look at my wife. I was a little upset, knowing that every guy in this building probably saw the photos I'm looking at right now. After reviewing all the photos, I copied the file onto several blank CDs. After Tracy looked into the room, I told her to delete the entire file as soon as she finished copying the information. Then I gave her 4 discs, which she quickly put in envelopes and returned one to me. I warned her to keep these discs away from children and assured her that I would send the other 3 on Monday morning. Later, I informed George of my plans during our meeting at the Holiday Inn. Despite his reluctance to involve the company, he eventually agreed. He mentioned that a team of workers would be working in the area on Monday and promised that they would remove the cameras that I planned to install. George and I shook hands, expressing our gratitude. We both agreed that the meeting was a success. The trip from Reading to Lancaster took about an hour. Upon arrival, I parked in the back lot, checked in, paid in cash, and received the keys. The first thing I did was change into a work suit. The maid from the 4th floor greeted me warmly when I showed her my work assignment. Since the room was empty, she allowed me to enter. It took only 20 minutes to install the fake smoke detectors. There were 2 double beds in the room, which allowed me to strategically position the cameras to film every bed and part of the room. Don't worry, I was an expert in my field. I carefully made sure that none of the residents guessed that there were 3 smoke detectors in the room. Returning to the room to change, I began to lay out all my equipment. The pizza delivery arrived about 30 minutes later. By 3 o'clock in the afternoon, everything was ready. Both cameras worked flawlessly, taking clear pictures even in the natural light of the room. My laptop was working smoothly, connected to a powerful high-speed network. One camera was set to capture every movement, and the second was triggered manually. I really liked my job, but there was one problem: I couldn't find Natalie. I quickly dialed her number on my mobile phone, admiring the convenient caller ID. "Hey, Steve, isn't this a great caller ID?" "Hi, Natalie, I just want to make sure everything is okay. The children are safe with my parents, and I'm still at work." "Where are you now?" "We're still at Katie's. Her husband looks after their children. Katie and I are planning to spend the night at Melanie Thompson's house. A few more girls from school will join us, and it will be fun. Maybe we can capture some memories and photographs. In your wildest dreams, do I know this guy Ray that Katie is talking to?" "I think yes, this is Ray Wilson who used to be with you on the football team." "Oh, I remember Ray now. How does he look now?" "It is assumed that he gained a little weight, lost his hair, and became a little softer. The usual signs of aging, I suppose." "Okay, Natalie, I'm letting you go. Enjoy it and call me if you need anything. I love you." "I love you too. Goodbye." I can't forget that Ray was a big jerk and not a very nice person. If they have already left, they will arrive soon. I assumed they would use Natalie's car, which was fine with me. Soon there was some movement in the room. The first camera started recording as planned. There were a lot of casual conversations about the upcoming trip and other random topics. Jared and Martin were big men. Jared had dark hair and eyes, and Martin was bald and looked pale despite their size. Both were in good physical shape. Jared's phone rang. They were both expected to be happy to chat, and I was curious how often they had talked before. Jared told the other person, most likely Katie, that they had already arrived and were happy to talk. They were supposed to discuss their preferences. "We'll be down in about 2 minutes. Fortunately, they were going to feed us first." I sat there feeling furious at the situation. If I hadn't been so focused on the task at hand, I might have been preparing to get into a fight with someone. I quickly left the room and headed for the stairs at the end of the corridor. Peeking around the corner of the building, I found Natalie and Katie waiting for them in the hall, laughing like schoolgirls. Jared and Martin exited the elevator, followed by Natalie, who quickly took Jared's hand and kissed him on the cheek. They all headed towards a black Mercedes parked on the street. Meanwhile, I noticed a Volvo parked at the back of the parking lot, which indicated that someone was trying to be inconspicuous. A few minutes later, I was helping load Natalie's trash bags into the car. I was sure she would come back from the restaurant slightly tipsy. I left a note on the driver's seat of the car explaining that the locks had been changed in the house and that I was taking the children on a long vacation. After that, I went to Taco Bell to refresh myself for the night ahead and treated myself to premium burritos while the kids ate ribs. Life was expecting injustice. When I returned to the room and waited for the inevitable, they were about an hour away from returning. I tried to think of what I could do at the last minute before they arrived, knowing full well what would happen when they arrived. I wasn't sure about my plans for the evening. It was clear to me that this meeting was not for a canasta game. I was dreading what would happen next. I've always thought that Natalie and I had a happy life together. She never complained or showed any signs of unhappiness. When Jared was born, she took care of me and expressed joy at the birth of her son. I couldn't help but ask if she had contacted Jared's biological father to congratulate him. As soon as she could, the thought of it was depressing. I regretted the time I spent with a woman who could betray me without hesitation and not feel guilty for a second, a woman who could trick me into raising someone else's child and find pleasure in it. At that moment, it was difficult for me to evoke any sympathy for her. Even though I felt too prepared, I continued to make final preparations. It was my only chance, and I couldn't afford to miss it. I didn't want to miss anything, so when they burst into the room laughing and giggling, I was ready. Martin brought a bottle of something, quickly filling 4 glasses. Katie grabbed 2 pillows and threw them on the floor. "Great, let's get started. The winner gets the first 3, she announced, prompting a burst of laughter. "How are we going to make love in threesomes if there are only 2 guys?" said Natalie. Natalie noticed. "Hey," she added with a mischievous grin, "women also like to be kissed." Laughing, Katie and Natalie playfully took off their tops and bras, forcing the guys to drop their trousers and boxers with wide smiles on their faces. Katie called the guys to action. I couldn't believe what was happening because we all participated in the competition. I was not only angry but also envious. The cameras worked flawlessly, forcing me to take my mind off the entertainment to capture every moment. Thanks to the ability to control the manual zoom, I was able to record several minutes of excellent video, almost comparable to a professional adult film. "I'm almost done. Get ready for dessert," Jared exclaimed. Periodically, I took several pictures with a zoom camera, mesmerized by watching my beloved wife take off the remnants of her clothes. Katie and Natalie lay down on one of the beds, and Martin quickly followed them. Despite the jokes about making love in threesomes, it was clear that this was not going to happen yet. Throughout the evening, they experimented with various positions, trying them all. I managed to take some great pictures of the whole episode. There was a break in room 411, Katie went to take a shower, and Natalie was brushing her teeth. Jared and Martin were just relaxing over a glass of beer. I picked up a disposable cell phone and dialed Baltimore's number. "Hello, Mrs. Kramer," I said. "This is Walter Perkins. I called from a medical equipment conference in Lancaster. Are you Jared Kramer's wife?" "Yes, but he's not available right now. I wanted to inform you that your husband and Mr. Blank were honored at the conference tonight. We would like to send you photos from the ceremony by email. Could you tell us the email address to which they can be sent? Also, do you have the email address of Martin Blank's wife so that we can send photos together?" "Yes, she's on the site bolt.com. "Great, that's all I need. The photos will be ready in a few minutes." She could eavesdrop on the Wi-Fi in the hotel, but I didn't mind because it didn't concern me. The conversation in room 411 paused while they came to their senses. "Natalie, does your husband take good care of my son?" "Of course, he does, silly. 8 years have passed, and this idiot still hasn't realized that the child isn't his. Steve lives in his own world. He would have been able to figure it out if a letter had come in the mail. It would be great if you sent a birthday present or something from time to time." "Yes, that would be great. It's enough for him to see something like this to understand what it's about." Katie intervened. "Damn it, I have 3 snotty kids running around the house, and my dummy is not the father of any of them, sitting there immersed in beer. He did not notice that the drinks in front of him were not really his." The band burst out laughing at Ray's mistake, and I managed to make a great audio clip of that moment. When the evening got boring, I decided to wrap it up. In search of entertainment, I went to one of the sites and joined an empty chat. After several attempts, I managed to connect to the live broadcast from room 411 on the site. Feeling mischievous, I added a headline to the page, Natalie and Katie versus Jared and Martin. My wife and her friend were ready to get back to business, focusing on the guys again. The webcast was successful. It was watched by more than 100 viewers. It took me about 20 minutes to pack up all our equipment for departure, leaving the computer for the live broadcast for last. By the time I finished, more than 400 viewers had already watched the program, and I suspected that some might have recorded it. I turned off the last device and dialed Ray Wilson's number. "Hi Ray, are you sober?" "Yes, who's calling?" "Hi Ray, it's me. I need you to hear this." I turned on a quick audio clip that I recorded with Katie. "Ray, she's in room 411 at the Holiday Inn with 2 healthy guys. If you go there, take something with you to protect yourself." Ray didn't say anything. He just grabbed the bat and jumped out of the Ford pickup. After I finished loading the Navigator, I resolutely went out into the building, despite feeling exhausted. The return trip brought me joy. The mobile home was fully ready to leave. I handed Dad the keys to our new house. Meanwhile, Mom went to Lancaster to visit Natalie at her parents'. Dad and his assistants took all our things out of the house. There was enough space in the barn to put everything together. Mom couldn't wait to find out how Natalie viewed the situation. Surprisingly, my parents still have the number of one of those mobile phones that they threw away. I'll have my cell phone with me, but I intend to keep it off for the most part. Father will return the items to the central office on Monday. It was too late to leave, but I wanted to leave before Natalie realized what was going on. We booked a van parking spot near Hagerstown so that it would be convenient to get on the highway in the morning. The girls organized a trip for us and did a great job. The only thing I've changed is I've shortened the distance between stops because the cost of gasoline has become too high. I was glad that I took a lot of money with me. After spending 3 days at Disney, we were now heading to Chattanooga to visit the aquarium. "Hi, Mom, this is Jenny. I just wanted to let you know that everything is going well. We're all having a great time, even Jared. We miss you too. We'll call you every couple of days to keep you updated. We're going to Orlando tomorrow night to spend almost a week at Disney." She continued to giggle for another 30 minutes. The next week was filled with chaos. We went to the Smoky Mountains. The children were busy, and I was doing important things. Seymour surprised Natalie by delivering the divorce papers, which took her by surprise. He informed her of the situation and warned her of the possible consequences if she decided to challenge the divorce. He had pictures of her and Floyd, the group in room 411, and the results of the DNA test. Jenny and Lynn were mine, but not Jared's. Natalie hired a lawyer, but in the end, she still agreed with what Seymour suggested. Seymour visited Big Jared at a hospital in Baltimore. Katie's husband did a great job on him and Martin. Ray was facing about 5 years in prison. I asked Seymour to help him. Both of my wife's lovers have been in the hospital for more than a week, and while they were recovering, they were handed the divorce papers. When they checked out, they had nowhere to go. Jared signed a paper relinquishing all rights to his son. Apart from broken bones and ribs, Martin's genitals were literally crushed by a bat. The doctors had little hope of recovery. Betty Moore had a buyer for the house. She spent a lot of time convincing Natalie to sign all the papers, but eventually knocked her out of her rut. I managed not to sign any documents and not to be present at the conclusion of the transaction, thanks to the power of attorney I signed. When the summer was coming to an end, I had the opportunity to chat with the children. I especially enjoyed talking to Jared, who loved the farm where our parents lived very much. I suggested that he stay on the farm permanently, to which he readily agreed, seeing how much my father enjoyed his company. Seymour prepared the adoption papers so that my parents could obtain the necessary legal authority to care for him. The only task Seymour was afraid of was to convince Natalie to agree to this. Unbeknownst to Natalie, my father also legally changed Jared's name to Jake. The girls quickly settled into their new school in Burlington and enjoyed a wonderful end to the summer in Vermont. After helping them settle in, Jake and I returned to the Keystone State. After talking with Mr. Turo, I learned that the preparations for my move to Alaska had already been completed. Tracy has already set up a temporary office, rented an apartment, and provided me with a company car upon arrival. It was very nice to hear that everything was ready. I left my house in the care of my father, and after 6 months, all the issues were settled. the divorce was finalized, and I was happy to see that my girls were doing well in school and both had received scholarships to James Madison University in Virginia. They were excited and full of joy that they finally had free time. Natalie was far away from them, only occasionally making phone calls. Jake did well in school and was focused on his new hobby, chicken breeding. One day, Natalie suddenly appeared in an old Ford Escort, saying that she needed to sell a Volvo to cover the costs of the divorce. It was a lie because I ended up paying both lawyers' bills. During her visit, Natalie constantly called Jake by the wrong name. Jared politely corrected her each time until finally, he apologized and left. Natalie continued to accuse my father of depriving the child of his birthright. My father objected, stating that this was too good an opportunity to miss, and left with Jake. Jack's mother did not visit him anymore but instead pocketed $1,000 from the sale of the house. He and Katie decided to celebrate their divorce with a trip to Las Vegas, spending all the money in just 4 days. I have no idea where Natalie is now. Maybe she moved to Baltimore. No matter what, I really love Alaska.